right, trying this again in 3, 2, 1.
All right. We are live.
I'm still waiting. I'm going to wait. You guys are seeing us. I'm intentionally waiting. I want to see it pop up on our church Facebook page. There it is. All right. So if you guys were listening to us a minute ago on my Facebook page, I shared this Faith on Fridays on the wrong stream. Sorry, guys. But we are live on Garfield Memorial Facebook page right now, Facebook Live, with two of our church members and friends, Kelly Bhatnagar and Rob Adams. We're so glad for you guys to be with us in their day jobs. They are psychotherapists and help people in the mental health field. I know Terry and I have consulted with these guys on occasion, and we just thought it'd be good to check in. How are we doing out there? So any of you out there want to jump in or ask questions, this isn't Lucy and Peanuts that the doctor is in, but these guys are willing to at least talk with us a little bit about what they're seeing. As I was sharing earlier, March 15th, the world kind of shifted on a dime, and here we are 4 months later, and we're still kind of in this unsettledness, and just interested to hear, we may be hearing some things that Kelly and Rob share with us where we thought, wow, I was kind of thinking what I was feeling wasn't normal, and we'll find out it was pretty normal. I've had a lot of that confirmation. So Pastor Terry's going to start us with some questions, and as you guys out there want to jump in, I see some of you jumping in now, we'll get going. So thank you for the little delay. Sorry, I hit the wrong button, but we're okay now.
So Kelly and Rob, I'd love to hear what it's been like for you as practitioners and as Christians, and maybe we'll even get into, you're both also parents of young children, and so we want to talk a little bit about how kids are affected in families. But what has it been like for you to be on the ground? And not only has this big shift happened in our lives in terms of our daily practices, but how you actually practices had to shift too. So just as in the church, we suddenly, after March 15th, went completely online. I know that you guys have had to do that, and kind of what it's been like for you. So just react. And Kelly, I'll go to you first.
Sure. The only word that I can think to describe it is unprecedented. So mental health professionals are considered essential workers and have been called on in truly unprecedented ways to serve other people. Many of us all of us, I would imagine, chose this field because we have this passion and excitement for helping other people. But there's also this well-known concept in the psychology literature called compassion fatigue. And so this is, displays of chronic stress or showing symptoms that mimic depression or anxiety, but this is brought on by the caregiving work that we choose to do. And I think that's impacted many mental health professionals. One thing I think of all the time in our schooling and throughout our education, we're really taught to kind of create boundaries and find separation between work and between work and home so that we ourselves don't burn out. But the pandemic has really made this impossible, right? So we're caring for others amidst our own worries about safety for our family and our friends and our communities. We're rapidly learning how to deliver effective treatments in new platforms, and we're even working from home, our home offices. I have one of my good colleagues works from a closet, like you mentioned earlier, Terry. She's working from a closet in her home right now. So, it's been a challenge in many, many ways, but at the same time, we and I still feel obligated to really uphold our essential work safely and effectively.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought about that, but the mental health of the mental health providers and practitioners has probably been impacted in ways that we haven't even thought about. So, Rob, how do you respond to that? How things have been for you and what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think for myself, for my family, and I think for my clients, that initial hit come mid-March, there's kind of like an initial adrenaline rush. We've got this initial stamina that we're going to use to get through this time, and then weeks turned into months and multiple months, and then that adrenaline was gone. The stamina really ran out, and then it was a matter of, okay, how do I find some more of my anchors to kind of keep me through a storm? And then unfortunately, a lot of those anchors were not available perhaps the people that I go to, places that I go to, practices that maybe have to change because I'm home with my kids or doing different things. So a lot of change, a lot of flexibility needed. And so I think that's been an interesting thing for me, both personally and then working with my clients, is figuring out how do I rework what my anchors are going to look like right now. Both my spiritual anchors of disciplines as well as relational anchors, things like that.
And Kelly, I've never heard that term compassion fatigue. But that's, I think any of us are providing for people, I'm sure on the front lines. I've heard that from, some of our medical people. They're not calling it that language, but nurses, physicians, pastors, we're, as you say, Rob, there's an adrenaline because, we're essential workers. People need us at this time. But then, in the unprecedented aspect, and I keep saying no playbook, I missed a class in seminary on how to be a pastor during a pandemic. And, that if we're not careful, we can expend so much emotional, psychological, spiritual capital. I preached on that at Easter, put your oxygen mask on first, and then I confessed to the staff, well, it sounded good. I'm not sure I did it, but so I think we're talking about, even in that world, I guess just, and not to stereotype or label it all, but I think as you guys have a listening ear in on a little bit of, the psyche of our people, of all of us, what are some common things you've seen? Maybe some kind of common threads that, reactions, feelings that people might think are abnormal that really aren't abnormal. Maybe there were some like Rob at that start. And then even now, 4 months later, maybe it's a little different ethos or something. Anything, trends or thoughts that you've seen with folks that we shouldn't think we're, the only one feeling that way?
I mean, I think one thing is that it just kind of keeps coming in waves. We figure out how we adjust to the first month, and then something changes. So it's kind of like you're on the dance floor and you figure out the dance to the music, and then someone changes the music. And it's like, all right, what's the new dance? Now it's summertime. And then even in the last week or two, there's just a lot more going on, again, personally and professionally, about schools reopening and what's that going to look like. So now the music is changing again, and we're having to figure out, okay, what do I need to do for my family and for myself to adjust to this new situation, whatever that might look like. And it's going to look different in my community than maybe it does the next town over. And so how do we support each other? I think we try to make the unknown known in order to feel just more safe, more secure. And unfortunately, we can't make too much of the unknown known right now. So we try to figure that out. And that's, I think, what stirs up a lot of that anxiety, that uncertainty, that I can't wrap my mind around what is this unknown entity, whether it be health risks, what school will look like in 2 months, what my job will look like today versus in 2 months versus next winter. I'm already thinking, people are already thinking ahead to all these changes. And that's a lot to hold on to. And especially when we can't actually really grab onto those things clearly.
Kelly, how would you talk about that? How do people feel when the music keeps changing? What are the common emotions that you're
stressed? One point I wanted to bring, I think it's important to realize too that a mental health crisis has long been in existence before COVID-19. 1 in 5 Americans have been diagnosed with a clinical mental health disorder, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. But I think what's happening now is the global pandemic is exacerbating these issues that have already been at play. I think people are experiencing an intensity of emotion in ways that they haven't been in the past, and now they don't have their communities to talk about it with. In this, well, we do have Zoom, thankfully, thank you Zoom, but it's not the same, So I think that can really work to exacerbate some of these issues. I was reading one research paper and that found that 45% of Americans' mental health has been negatively impacted by COVID-19. So we're seeing increases in depression, anxiety, substance use, insomnia, anger, emotional exhaustion, and some folks are even experiencing symptoms that look similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. But I also think that even if someone's not struggling with a clinical diagnosis, it's easy to just see how chronic worry, major lifestyle changes that weren't expected. I love that Rob keeps talking about the need for flexibility today and, you know, how things are rapidly changing, but it's how to see that. And social isolation in and of itself can have a negative impact on one's mental health. So, you know, of course, you know, as Rob was mentioning, there's worry about our own families, our own jobs, but many of us psychologists are experiencing is that we've been incredibly busy because folks have been calling on us to be able to offer that support, and we want to be there for the community to offer that support, you know. But then again, that kind of can shift back over to the compassion fatigue that we talked about earlier.
Have you seen additional people coming for help? It sounds like it, but you know, new clients and people coming. But are you seeing kind of the same reasons that people are coming to see you, or you know, anxiety, depression, or is it shifted a little bit in all this?
I would say that it's been pretty much the same. Like you might use the same type of terms like anxiety, depression, parent-child conflict has been a big thing, and I think they're around each other a lot more. So there's going to be more conflict, and parents are going to see the anxiety a lot more. Whereas before, maybe it's more prevalent at school or other places, and they're not really around it. And I think in some ways, the setting of we're in a pandemic almost like removes the barrier of stigma to some degree. Not completely, but I think it kind of gives me a reason to say, well, all of this is so unprecedented that I have to get this extra support. Well, they probably needed it before in many situations, but sure, I'm glad that got you through the door. And let's talk about some of this stuff that has actually been going on longer than the pandemic. And some of it is new. Again, I feel like there's so many different responses to it that it's really keeping us on our toes. Because I've got some clients that think that, you know, social isolation is great. And it makes it hard to work on some of their issues because they're not in school where they, you know, are facing more challenges. And so there's a variety of different things that where we have had to pivot in some ways. And I think families are also experiencing that. And so with that new perspective, definitely people have been calling with some of those concerns.
And that's been my experience too. You know, it's not that a diagnosis is changing or the presenting complaints are changing. It's, I think, more so intensifying. It's just becoming a lot more intense. So my practice specializes in eating disorders and related psychological conditions. And what I'm just seeing, the folks that I treat, it's just a lot harder to be able to manage some of these urge for problematic behaviors. You know, if I'm seeing somebody for depression, you know, a lot of the worry thoughts and the negative thoughts that can lead to depressive actions, you know, are intensified. So that it's not necessarily that what's bringing people in the door is changing, but they may be experiencing it more intensely.
Yeah. And
I want to say, Kelly, when you were saying, you know, I've been hearing a lot of people talking COVID-19. A lot of what is an accelerant. I mean, things were already going a certain direction, whether in business, we see in church, world, or whatever, and obviously in mental health. And then this just accelerates everything. And I have to wonder, you know, when we have, you know, these high profile, exasperating situations around race, that adds another trauma in for African Americans. You know, with some of the anti-immigration stuff with Latinx and Asian Americans. I have two Asian American pastors in one of my cohorts, and the amount of racism they've experienced, you know, in response to the quote unquote virus from China, et cetera. It's almost like a perfect storm in some ways. Like we were hit with this pandemic, and then stuff that's already been here. We have to face it, and we're almost feeling inept. So people hit the streets, or what do we do? And then you've got employment things, you know, with just the number of people unemployed and furloughed and wondering, am I going to be employed yet? And they already knew AI was coming. I mean, we're 3 to 5 years before that hits. Yep. And then you've got now, as you're talking, Rob, with families and parents and children in the same space. I'm thinking of marriages. You know, my wife and I were talking like, should we be doing like marriage Zoom? Because husbands and wives and others in married relationships haven't sat and spent that much time. So it's like all these clouds seem to be lining up. And it's helpful with your words about it's revealing what's already there. We've seen that with some of the social injustice, but I guess, you know, what do we do? How do we pump the brakes on that? What are some perspective things people can think about? And before you just jump in on that, those of you guys are watching, Kelly and Rob are clinical psychologists that are part of Garfield Memorial Church. And we're just talking a little bit about just our mental health in this crazy year that's become 2020. what's going on. So I guess with just all of that stacking up, you know, I know you don't give universal prescriptions or whatever. What are some things that are pretty common that people are feeling that we can just take a breath on? I mean, I know what I'd say spiritually, but I'm wondering from your profession, what are some things like, hey, this is pretty common, you know, take a breath, you know, this is kind of what we've seen, and just some things you'd say to folk that's like, these storm clouds just seem to keep on coming.
Some pretty common things to expect. One, confusion. You know, I'm a person that I like to know what I'm doing. I like to know what's happening next week, and we just can't do that right now. So stress related to not knowing, you know, as Rob mentioned earlier, what the next dance is, what the next song is that's gonna be playing, leads to a lot of confusion. I think feelings of anxiety, hurt, worry,
Mhm.
and even anger, you know,
Yeah.
about how life has changed, you know, needs to really be normalized. You know, I think even in there's an emphasis on changing emotion. When you're feeling sad, you got to change it right away. Here's what you have to do to change that emotion. You're feeling angry, well, go talk to somebody so that you can you're not feeling angry. But I think right now there's something to be said for being able to accept some of the emotions that you're and sit with some of the emotions that you're experiencing right now. Label some of the emotions that you're experiencing right now, so we're not just stuffing it down. You know,
That's good.
so that would be one of the things that I would recommend.
That's good.
Yeah, I think that acceptance piece, that being able to tolerate discomfort. I mean, we generally, we don't like discomfort. We try to get away from it as much as we can, and we try to, you know, lessen our children's discomfort even. And yet I would much rather, you know, encourage people to help your children learn to accept and tolerate that discomfort rather than just, you know, get rid of it, because we can't fully get rid of it. That's just going to be a frustrating process if you really try to do that. I think another exercise I have people go through is asking themselves, what has changed, but what has not changed? And if I really slow down, there's plenty of things that have not changed, whether it be about people that are still important to me. Maybe I see them differently because I'm seeing them on a computer instead of in person, but their value to me, what the, you know, our relationship in the past has been like, those things have not changed. And that brings in, you know, the conversations I've had with a few just about spiritual aspects, about God's character has not changed through all of this. My access to, whether it be prayer or worship, like it may, some things are changed, but some things are not changed. And so really kind of looking through that and being grateful for the things that are not different, I think it's helpful to clarify for yourself.
That's good. Those are good. I'm going to take both of those, you know, to sit with the emotion a little bit. Don't immediately rebuke it and I got to fix this. And also in the midst of so much change, what hasn't changed? Those are two really, that's good. That's good. I need to hear that myself personally.
And really pointing towards gratitude. I think that that's something that really helps. It helps me when I remember to be grateful for the things that, you know, that I do have. And especially with the racial injustice and what's been going on, I've heard a lot of people, particularly African Americans, talking about lamenting. Like, we just need to pause and lament sometimes. And, you know, so that's what I hear you saying, Kelly, about we just have to name our emotions and experience them, and, you know, Rob, not run away from the discomfort, you know, right away. So, you know, and kids have come up a couple of times in different ways in this conversation. So talk to us a little bit about, you know, how do parents talk to their kids about the situation we're in, you know, if they're feeling they might be picking up anxiety and stress from their parents and wondering why their parents are, you know, maybe a little different than they were. And just how do you even begin to help kids manage and cope? So start with you, Kelly.
I think one important thing to do is to remain calm when you're talking to your kids about this, you know, and provide reassurance that we're working on this as a family, we're staying safe because of these precautions that we're taking. You know, there's something to be said for parents just making themselves available to be able to field questions or just listen to concerns or to validate some of the emotions that our kids are expressing. Maybe it's as simple as, I'm angry because my baseball, you know, my baseball game was canceled, or I don't see my friends as much anymore. I miss my teachers. And, you know, knowing that we don't always have to have the answers, but we get a really powerful tool is just active empathic listening can really go a long way with kids. You know, well, it's something that I've talked about with some of my mom friends in some of our mom groups, is that there can also be a lot of blaming. We're all scared right now. There can be a lot of blaming language going on, and I think that that blaming language can really contribute to the stigma surrounding illness. So really making sure we're being thoughtful about the words that we're using to kind of describe safety precautions with our children and how we're talking about other people, and paying attention to what kids see. I've been recommending that we reduce the amount of screen time surrounding COVID events that we're exposing our kids to ensure the information that they're getting is first developmentally appropriate and to make sure that it's accurate, And then finally, I think one of the best things we can do is teach kids that everyday actions, teach them everyday actions that can help reduce the spread of germs. So, singing happy birthday as you wash your hands, practice wearing masks now before they go back to school. If they're going back to school, make it fun, activities to decorate their mask so that, you're kind of joining as a family in these safety actions.
And building on that, I think too, like figuring out the connection to the emotional piece of those things. So have your kids wear a mask, not only to get used to it, but you wear a mask too and start talking about like nonverbal cues. Like, you can't see my mouth anymore. So you got to really pay attention to my eyes. Can you tell if I'm smiling right now or if I'm sad? Like, let's just try to practice. And let's also give you permission. Like, you have permission that if you're at school, let's say, and you feel unsafe, you're uncomfortable, the plexiglass is weird, it's okay to raise your hand and say, teacher, like, I don't like this. Okay, like let's be able to speak those things, because we know that's going to be going on in the classroom, in every classroom, I imagine, at some point. And let's say you have permission. You're definitely, that doesn't change anything about you if you can speak up to say, here's kind of where I'm at. And then kind of piggybacking on with something Kelly said too, I think integrating coping into just kind of family life. And so if we know that exercise helps, let's all go out and do something together. Maybe we're going to cook some meals with fresh ingredients all together that kind of we can talk about being together and how this food is kind of helping our bodies and all these things that we do that we don't have to wait till we're in distress to kind of talk about these things and remember that they are good for us and how our physical health affects our mental health and our relationships as well. And then finally, I would think about like creating a family narrative. We're all kind of creating a narrative around, the coronavirus and the quarantine and things like that. And that's a helpful process when you're experiencing trauma. Trauma happens to me, but this idea of making meaning out of it, that's something that I can do in response. And so being able to, make a family scrapbook of all the different things that were different and that you did during this shutdown and during this unusual summer that you'll have to remember probably for the rest of your life as strange. But here's some things that, we can make meaning out of it. We can create a narrative that gives me a little bit of more clarity. And same thing heading into school, that I think will be an important thing to do with family.
And encourage kids to be forward thinking as well. Something that my kids really enjoyed doing was kind of creating their post-COVID bucket list, the things that they can't wait to get back out and do. And we actually have it on a big poster board in our kitchen, where the things that they can just check off, things that they're looking forward to so that they can remember, there will be fun things, there still is a future.
Kind of reclaiming something that's been taken from me currently. Yeah.
And we've kind of named it. I don't know what to, again, I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but both of you, in addition, to being members of the church, followers of Christ, professional clinical psychologists, you're parents of younger children. So you're right in the mix of this whole angst that is on the forefront right now around schools. And so I got to believe maybe some parents are talking to you just professionally, or you're just talking to each other. What do we speak into that unknown? Because it's just a big unknown, and my kids are grown now, but trying, remembering when my children were your age, people come to us for answers, but I'm not sure what I would do right now. I guess you're gathering information, you're, staying nimble with it, but any things you would say to parents right now? Because I just know I've talked to several, that seems to be the current right now, prominent angst. Anything what you guys are doing yourselves as parents, and things you might say to other parents that are trying to wrestle with what in the world do we do?
I think the first thing that I would say is we're in this together. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are good answers, but all I could do is empathize with you, and we could talk through options, when we have more information. Rob and I were talking before the call started. One of the biggest challenges, at least with the school district my children are in, is that ideas and, plans are starting to come out right now. And the decisions will have to be made, but as parents, we'll still be making decisions with limited amount of limits.
Uh-oh, Kelly froze.
Information, but it's just to no fault of the school.
Hey, Kelly, you're freezing up for some reason.
They don't have all the right answers.
You were freezing up for some reason. We lost you there for a minute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're doing
Is that
good.
better?
Yeah,
Okay.
you were right where you said the new ideas that were coming out where your kids go to school, and then you kind of froze.
Okay, yes. So our school district just started telling us some of the plans, potential plans for the fall, and decisions will have to be made. But as parents, we'll also be making decisions with very limited information, which is a challenge. And it's to no fault of the school. I truly believe that the schools are doing their best to, keep the best interest of our children and their education. And they don't have all the answers either,
Right.
So I think, as parents, just kind of talking with each other and validating each other and helping each other to stay informed and making sure that we are listening to accurate information and not the gossip mill about what's going to be happening with schools. And again, really addressing that issue of stigma, even around decision making as parents. Well, are you going to send your kids to school? Some parents may not have the option because of childcare. They would love to be able to stay home and help with homeschooling, but that may not be in the cards for them. And similarly, like there are some parents, not judging or adding stigma to parents, who'd say, I'm not going to take that risk with my children right now. So really, we are all in this together.
Yeah, and I want to hear what you want to say, Rob, but I'll forget if I don't mention this. I think that can take some pressure off of even us as leaders. And you talked about the compassion fatigue. We've got a question about teachers, so think about that. Ann was asking on our line, what recommendations do you have for teachers as they're facing this upcoming school year? Like what choice do they have or don't have? But I think in some ways, even as a pastor, as you talked about the stigmas, well, wait a minute, you're letting people in the building. Oh, wait a minute, you don't have any faith. You're not letting people in the building. That one of the things is true, as you said, as parents, and even with government leaders or business leaders, as consumers, as church members or whatever, people make their own decisions. Like we do the best we can. We as you say, the school system knows, or whoever, or our governor, or whatever. And then folks, once we know the facts and the lay of the land, begin to make some of their own decisions, and that's okay. We don't want something that's totally unsafe or whatever. But I do think that real respect for people to, that we're not all going to be at the same place at the same time. And I don't know, I find that helpful. But Rob, what's kind of your experience as a dad and you and your wife with your kids? And then also anything either you guys would say when somebody brings up, hey, what about teachers? I think that's a good question too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and this goes along with what Kelly was saying about like, let's keep sharing ideas. We got to be so creative right now to figure out how are we going to manage different situations. And so being able to be upfront with friends or family and say, hey, here's what I'm facing, and I'm not sure the best way about it. Like, let's just hear kind of how you're handling it or something similar. How do you handle it when you go to the playground and there's kids that aren't wearing masks and you want your kids to wear masks? How do you talk to your kids about them? Or how do you say, you know what, we're actually going to have to find a different playground today or something like that. And be able to have some outlets to kind of tolerate that discomfort that comes with telling kids, like, I know you're disappointed, but this is the choice we're making right now. And so with teachers too, I think again about that creativity that's going to be needed to both cope and know that there's going to be some unexpected things. And I think of many great teachers that have different rhythms in place that help them to connect with their kids, the kids that they see as the kind of their part of their flock in that moment. And the way that they have to connect is probably going to look different. I think about physical presence as a regulating factor. When my kids are struggling with something, I get closer to them. Like I create not just eye contact, but my physical presence can be helpful. And teachers, I think, do that often. You're struggling with this reading, I'm going to stand right next to you. And I'm going to, just my physical presence helps you to maybe calm down and persevere. But maybe this year I'm not allowed to stand next to you. I'm not allowed to put a hand on your shoulder, kind of encourage you to try again. And so how can I do that? How can I kind of come up with some type of system that says, hey, each kid's got this unique item that I put in your desk and it's clean. And I have a replica on my desk. And so when I hold it, I'm thinking about you and I'm encouraging you, something where I can show some type of connection. Again, that requires thinking in new ways. And so collaborating with other teachers. And then I think when you're out of that school mode, being able to have specific boundaries. It's really easy to say, especially if the school ends up being taught remotely, like school and home and family, like it all just kind of gets meshed together. And I think it's really important that we all separate some of those things at times to say, no, I'm putting this stuff away. I am just going to be focused on these relationships or this part of myself, this part of my overall health. Those are important things to do, but hard. And we're drawn away from that sometimes.
That's really good. Kelly, anything on that aspect about teachers feeling, I mean, even their own insecurity, and I don't know if I want to go back.
Teachers really were the unsung heroes, I think, of the last academic school year, being kind of just thrown, we as families were, but teachers as well, just thrown into this new virtual world of education, which was very challenging to manage. I like a lot what Rob said about, really trying to think of creative ways to engage children, given that they can't do it in the same ways anymore. And what he said about boundaries, I think is so important. I can only imagine how many emails teachers are getting from parents. Should I do this? Should my kid be doing this? Is my child falling behind? And so many educators go above and beyond. And I remember one of my kids' teacher sending us an email response at 11 o'clock at night, which as a parent, I was incredibly grateful for, but then got me thinking about, teachers need boundaries too, they, despite being called upon in unprecedented ways again, that to really preserve their own mental health, that they'll need to have an idea of what their boundaries are when working with the students in a different platform, in a different way.
What are some things, I think we talked about, people are feeling drained and pushed to the edge of their limits and, exhausted, fatigued. Any thoughts on strategies that might be sort of restorative for people to practice when they recognize, like, oh my gosh, I'm about to go down a dark way or something like that? Are there any strategies or any ways that you restore yourselves? Rob, earlier you were talking about anchors and how it's a little harder to find some of those now, but just anything that comes to mind to help people emotionally restore.
I think of, finding, I guess, two thoughts, like finding some way to release, what often gets, pent up, especially if you're not, in your normal situations where you have some of those releases. And so being intentional, I guess, about that, like that I'm going to go for a bike ride, and as I ride away from my home, I'm just going to think about releasing this stress and reducing it and getting, thinking through whatever angry thoughts I might have or the confusion. But then on the way home, I'm going to think about what I'm grateful for. I'm going to notice the trees. I'm going to notice the flowers. I'm going to change my perspective on that way home. And so now I have this release and recovery type of period. And I really appreciated it. It has stuck with me since grad school. I had a professor on the first day of grad school ask us to think about recreation, and says, what recreates your soul? What is it that recreates, and so just being able to spend 5, 10 minutes, 30 minutes this weekend to say, what's on that list? So I need to know, before I can do those things, I need to know what they are. And so it's okay to pause and to really reflect on it, because sometimes we don't even have an answer to that. I ask plenty of people and they're like, well, I don't know. And so it's like, okay, let's just spend some time. What is it? Think about past times where you're like, in this moment with these people doing this thing, that was filling to me. Okay, put that on the list. Let's see what else there is. We don't often give ourselves permission to really slow down and be that focused to figure that out.
Good.
I think along with that too, if you're noticing yourself on the emotional or mental health decline, knowing when to take what I call brain breaks. We're just bombarded with so much information, some of it more accurate than others. We have to really find that delicate balance between staying informed so we can stay well, but also not becoming overly obsessed with information seeking. I think knowing some of the warning signs and the risk factors for major mental health concerns, particularly depression and anxiety, would be helpful, and not being afraid to call upon mental health professionals for help. So right, but do one, as Rob was mentioning, kind of finding what's changed, what hasn't changed, is there anything positive in this moment? Access to mental health care is completely different because of virtual. We can do virtual or teletherapy. So to be whereas it may have been a barrier before, just out of discomfort or transportation, whatever that might be, to access a mental health professional who can help with that, that's been removed to a certain degree by the use of technology. So knowing how, and I will say with teletherapy, I'm sure Rob, you can agree, it feels a little weird at first meeting a stranger and that you're going to tell all your deepest, darkest secrets to over a computer, but eventually, it starts to, you start to normalize to it and it starts to feel normal. And I have to say, it's been incredibly effective and helpful to many, many of the clients that I work with. So trying something new so that you can have access to mental health support. And then the other, like along with what Rob was saying, kind of prioritizing yourself, prioritize in making sure of creating boundaries within your home as well, particularly I think for parents. Just because everyone is home doesn't mean they get a say in every second of your day. So, parents remembering that sometimes we need some maybe alone time, maybe just couple or marriage time, spouse time. But and then the last point, just really making sure to again acknowledge the feelings. We don't always have to change what we're feeling. Sometimes we just need to accept what we're feeling in that moment and kind of sit with it.
I think, maybe if you could say anything about navigating, I really appreciate what you just said, Kelly, in the sense of with the virtual has opened up some avenues, but even almost a little more specific, navigating that. I mean, I've called on you during this time. People sometimes will call us as pastors, and I encourage you to do that. Seriously, if you guys are, feeling some kind of way, you can talk to your pastors about anything. And if, we need to direct, I consult with professionals like this in the church. We have others that I trust will give good recommendations. But I think, Kelly, I'm thinking a conversation you and I have where somebody calls, might be a business owner or a teacher or, maybe a medical professional. Like they might know the medical professional a little more, but like I'm overwhelmed. I don't even know who should I call? What's kind of the clearinghouse? Or if I have a substance abuse or something, it feels like there's something more specific. But if I'm just in one of those, I need to talk to somebody. I don't know. How do you access it? Where do you start? If it isn't on one of us.
Yeah, so I think, one of the easiest places to start is if someone is privileged enough to have insurance, you can always call your insurance company or go onto your insurance company's website in the behavioral health section, and you can filter, by specialty, by, insurance plan, by if you prefer working with a male or female, so starting with your insurance company for some recommendations on who might be a good fit. There's other resources. There's a website called Psychology Today, where you can just type in your zip code and a little bit more information about what you're looking for, and providers who specialize in that area will pop up. You can read a little bit about their background and the procedures for contacting them and whatnot. And there are other resources too, like the American Psychological Association. And other larger mental health organizations also often have a find a provider or a resources page. But I also think there's something to be said for talking to your community, and again, this kind of takes away some of the stigma of mental health, going to other people that you know and that you trust and say, you don't have to give the details of what your struggles may be, but do you know of anybody? Have you worked with anybody, that might be able to help me, and getting recommendations, word of mouth from people that you trust.
There you go.
Yeah, I have found that is a huge benefit, not just for getting connected to a provider, but just kind of normalizing what you're going through. And that's true for adults. And I have seen the relief on kids' faces when it's like, oh, they see a therapist too. So-and-so told me that he knows you. And that made me feel so much better that like, I'm not the only one that, comes to a place like this. Like, absolutely. I know lots of kids that, you might know, you might not know, but that is a really valuable thing. And you also might know connections besides pastors. You might, think about pediatricians, other, primary care providers, schools. All of those folks have lists of providers that they can also recommend as a starting place for you.
That's good. Hey, Larry asked a good question on Facebook. I hadn't really thought about, but I'm just going to kind of paraphrase it. Say, he talked about many of the distractions we normally have. It's kind of like your bike ride, Rob, or whatever, things that we're trying to do. But for some, it might be sports. For some, it might be concerts. But regardless, things that did for recreating, I guess, to use that term, recreating. I'm always going to remember that now with recreation, recreating, that those are kind of shut down. And so his question is, what can we do productively to replace, fill in for these, so that bad habits don't suddenly take their place, overeating, other aspects, turn into crutches when I'm stressed. I thought it was a good question. Some of those recreating things I just can't do. What are some ideas of before I, turn to something that may be not productive for me? How do I start thinking? It's almost like that image of teachers doing it in a new way, or you guys doing it in a new way. What would you say to that? Either one of you.
I think sometimes we fall into the trap of evaluating something's effectiveness before doing it. So I might say like, oh, that's not going to be relaxing enough. I'm not going to try that. Or that's not really what I feel like doing right now. I don't feel like going and swinging in a hammock. That might not be exactly what I need. Well, we're already making an assumption there. Maybe it could actually benefit you. And maybe it's not going to do everything, but maybe it does something. And right now we need, we're talking about percentages. We're not saying I'm going to go from 0 to 100%, but can I get 20% back of my restoration? And then can I call or text a friend that, yeah, it's not as ideal as seeing them in person, but can I get another 10% from that? And so I would say finding some of those things and being willing to either try something new or maybe try something old that you haven't done for a while. Go to, again, like find a swing and just swing and just see what it does. Go on a bike ride, find some, nature centers that are around. The metro parks have been great for my family as something kind of more new to us this summer. So, I think those are some things that come to my mind initially.
I like what you said, Rob, about, not being afraid to try something new. There are several published hobby lists all over the internet, of 101 different things that you can try, many of them that you can try in isolation or while social distancing, and yeah, like I would never think like, oh yeah, swinging on a hammock will do it for me. That would never come to my mind, but I got to give it a try to know whether or not it's going to work. But, kind of when it kind of jump back to Chip, you had mentioned something about, to stay productive. I think even with staying productive, I think that we also have to kind of balance that with self-compassion too. I think particularly when COVID first started back in March, and when everybody started isolating and was home, there was kind of almost this competition, who could be the most productive. We have to be professional bakers. We have to, who can exercise the most, who can, who can clean their house the fastest, and the whole time I'm thinking, oh my goodness, as we're competing with each other to be productive, we are in a global pandemic, How do we also practice, self-compassion that we might be watching a little bit more Netflix right now than we typically would if this wasn't happening. And that's okay because COVID is happening right now, but just making sure, like you were mentioning, that to be mindful that it doesn't go to a place where it becomes an unhealthy coping mechanism, because that would be a different story.
Yeah.
And along those lines, I think as a frame to help you make that choice is the idea of, is this moving me towards health or maybe, towards something that is less healthy, that it's not necessarily a goal that I have to achieve 100% and then I'm done, but this is something I value and I want to keep moving towards that direction. And if I can say, yes, this, choice is moving me towards that, okay, good. Like, let's keep that going. But if it starts to be moving me away from, whether it be my values regarding my physical health or my relationships, education, like whatever it might be, it's moving me not towards, okay, then maybe I reevaluate.
Yeah. I agree with you, Rob, on that, and I think you really have to do a lot of self-reflection to think what is going to be helpful and healthy for you. And that's relative, right? The population that I work with individuals with eating disorders, kind of this rush to be productive and, to get more exercise in and not gain those COVID pounds really was detrimental to the mental health of a lot of the patients that I see, the patients that I work with. So again, just kind of finding that balance.
It's almost filtering what you're listening to, right? And that goes back to some of that screen time you're talking about with children, Kelly, but I think even with adults, with social media and everything else, all of a sudden, those voices that aren't really helpful, no matter how much you watch the news or how much you spend on social media, I think you're so alone, you're looking for connections. And then all of a sudden you get this wave of stuff that you really don't need. I've started to realize that in my own way. Like I don't have to know everything that's happening every minute, even though I feel like I do when I'm a pastor and all this. Just monitor that as well, because if you don't filter that information, as you said with your clients, I think with all of us, we can get triggered with some really stuff that's just not healthy.
One of the links I sent when we were talking, I was talking with Rob and Kelly about this conversation, was something I'd heard of called doom scrolling, which is, people going on social and just like starting and just scrolling down and almost subjecting themselves to more and more of the kind of the bad news. And so that's, kind of limiting that and not going there. We're going to need to wrap up pretty soon. I wonder, Rob and Kelly, is there anything that's been an unexpected gift in the midst of all this for you? And, as in your role as counselors and therapists, but also even personally?
I think for me, it's really taught me the importance of patience and prayer. I've done many of the groups at Garfield, which I've been so grateful for the community that I've created through the church, and what a lot of people who I've been in the groups with know is that my prayer life was something that I had always been somewhat uncomfortable with. And that was one of my goals, gaining more, I had a lot of my own self-judgments. Am I doing this right? And am I spending enough time? And am I not spending enough time? But I think a gift in this was that now it's almost kind of a more private or a more intimate relationship with God that I've been able to have through my prayer life, because it's been a journey that I've kind of had to do, not completely on my own, but more isolated than maybe in the past, And I think other gifts too, I think just I've learned more about purpose and priorities. Our family, because of the ages of our kids, we have a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, and then a 2-year-old. We were at the point before this happened where we were always on the go every minute of every weekend, even most weeknights too, where baseball practices and dance and tutoring and piano lessons, and I'm running off to here and my husband's running off to there, and for us to be able to just take a step back and say, it's Sunday, we're going to watch our virtual service, and then we're just going to chill as a family and play a game, and to not have I never realized the beauty of not having something on our calendar, so I think now I have just a different sense of my priorities.
Yeah, I probably brought up bike riding because I've been doing more of that in the last few months. It's been something that I think if I had my usual schedule back in February, I wouldn't have the time to do that. And so as I've been riding just around Shaker Heights, I've been noticing a lot of trees. And I know that sounds kind of silly, and it's not something that I normally pay attention to, but I've been amazed at the beauty of trees lately. And I often talk to clients who are anxious about the idea of planting roots to kind of keep you firm in a storm. And I look at some of these trees and they're huge and they're beautiful. And so I've been noticing creation in new ways, I suppose. And that's been, I think, a restorative practice for me, just not only the physical exercise, but just being able to be more aware. And there's times when I say like, oh, I should be listening to a podcast. I should be listening to a sermon. I should be like doing these things while I ride my bike. And I've kind of given myself permission to say like, no, just do one thing. Just do one thing right now. You don't have to take it all in. And so that's been a really important practice for me, is to slow it down that way.
It's not directly related, but one other thought that I wanted to make sure to share too is I think this is really the time that we need to circle back and check in with our most vulnerable populations too, in our current social environment, it's especially important to know that Black people and other people of color are disproportionately impacted at this time.
Yes.
COVID is devastating communities of color at disproportional rates, and there's a higher mortality rate in communities of color. So if you combine this with the ongoing impact of systemic racism, stress related to the continued deaths of unarmed Black folks at the hands of police, and a lack of mental health resources in these communities, Chip, you used this word early, it really does create a perfect storm for significant mental health struggles. So making sure that we're attending to, talking about, and checking in with this particularly vulnerable population, I would encourage everyone to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sure. It's just deal with trauma too. That's what we were talking with the group the other day as well, and all of these things are colliding. So I'm so thankful for you guys and for the work you do. And I think, as you were saying, Kelly, we get so, on the hamster wheel, and it's nobody's fault, but it's just kind of, especially American society, because we are pretty spoiled, and we just feel like we have to always be doing something. And there's something freeing, even though none of us were prescribed it this way, to just get away from that for a second and refocus and think about, what do I need to be doing more? And, I love that riding your bike more, Rob, and I've been trying to figure what some of those things are. There's so many weird rhythms with the life of a pastor in this kind of climate. But, my wife and I started doing more walks together than we ever were. And all of a sudden, she discovered the cultural gardens, I think they're called. You guys probably maybe know that in Shaker, where they have all the different, nations and cultures. And I've been in Cleveland 16 years now, never even heard of it. Yeah. And so I went over there and I'm like, this is a treasure. I'm like, here's Garfield Memorial, known as like this multicultural church in Cleveland. And I don't even know about the multicultural gardens. I started having this ideation of, we can do our walks, our cultural walks here, and have people from the church are from Norway meet us here. Anyhow, my mind went crazy. But I think I just used that as an illustration that this is in the refocusing time. It's good to find some of those things, to discover some of those things that, we didn't have time to do, but we should have taken the time to do, or maybe those things we were doing that we need to do more of. It's not just finding new things. So that's been really helpful, guys. I got to say to you, some of the tips you gave, making friend with the emotion, don't run away from that too quick. Don't just think of what we've lost, but what we have. You've given me, even as a pastor, a lot to think about. So Ann's just jumping in. I'll just do this last little comment, Terry, and then you can say what you want to say to close this out. Many of our elderly are also very isolated and vulnerable and cannot always get out of their living spaces. And we know that's a whole dynamic too. That's affected probably some of you. My dad's in a care facility down in Youngstown, and we've been going through that side of things as well. So, Terry.
Kelly, thanks for saying what you said about people of color, the vulnerabilities, and for the elderly. And, it almost makes me wonder if something that we might do to help our own emotional tumult is to reach out and try to help other people, and maybe focus less on ourselves and more on others at times. So we are going to wrap up, I promise, but is there anything we didn't ask or didn't talk about that you have kind of a burning left to say? And if not, that's okay. But we've covered certainly a lot of things and been pretty amazing. So.
I don't think so, but thank you so much for having us. It was a pleasure having this conversation.
Yeah, and who knows, we might have another one because I think this is a very big need another time. But anyhow, thanks so much, and thanks for tuning in, everybody. And
Thanks, Kelly and Rob. Thank you for what you do, and you guys are on the front lines in one arena. We're in the front line and another, but all of us together need to be on those front lines so we can experience wholeness. One of the Greek words for salvation, it is sozo, to be rescued, but there's another term, to be saved, that literally meant wholeness, to be whole. And I think something about being holy is being whole. And that's, Jesus said it, mind, soul, strength, mind, all of it. So thanks for the work you guys do. And but thanks for contributing to help us widen the circle as we do this together on Friday.
Thank you.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Please see you. Oh, Terry, next week we got special guests.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we'd love to throw that up there. So if you're here, you guys know in the fall, we did a series that really still bearing fruit from tablet to table, bringing back table, getting back to the table out of our tablets. And we were doing that in November before we knew the pandemic was going to hit. The author of that book, Dr. Leonard Sweet, he's the author of a lot of books. He's a spiritual guide. He's a great speaker. I had a privilege to keynote with him at a conference in Chicago. And I said, hey, I told him about how much impact that book's made on us. So he's going to join us next Friday on Faith on Friday. I have to share. I got to share that screen. Sorry, I'm waiting for Terry to do it.
Oh,
So,
sorry.
Can we see that? Or
I can see it.
All right. So that's next Friday, Dr. Leonard Sweet. This is a real treat. He speaks at conferences all over the country. But when he was, like I said, we had a chance to be on a keynote together. And I said, hey, your book made some impact. Would you come in and talk with us? He's an innovative, wonderful, again, spiritual architect and guide. So don't miss next Friday, 5 o'clock, Faith on Friday. So thanks again to Kelly and Rob and all of you for tuning in. God bless. Stay safe. You're in our prayers. We'll talk soon.
All right.
See you.